Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Big 12 Huddle here on YouTube. Almost mispronounced it there, but we're close.
The Bug 12.
The Big 12 Huddle here with your host, Calvin Glen Alexander, the host of the CGA Tour podcast for the Oklahoma State podcast for the College Huddle Network. And I am joined today by Night Bengal, Roger here, Roger Phipps, with the Night at Ones podcast here as my co-host, the UCF podcast for the College Huddle Network as well. Roger, how's it going?
Great. I'm for those of you that watch the show, you'll notice that I'm in a button up. That's because I just finished a meeting at 9:00, and because I'm dedicated to you and the Big 12 Huddle, I decided to jump right onto this podcast.
Well, thank you so much for joining, as always, here, co-host, as we break down the Big 12 here. And I'll switch in and out of the announcer voice every so often here, just to really trick everyone of what my voice actually is. But that being said here, Oklahoma State, our respective teams here, took the best of the Big 12 rankings-wise, at least, to the end of the game. They were on the ropes. We had them almost at their place on the ropes and could not pull it off, / got kind of screwed. I'm saying could not pull it off in Oklahoma State's way because we had multiple players get injured during the game. And
excuses. Let me play the violin.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're still looking for that first Big 12 win. So when we almost win at their place at a night game on a Friday night in Provo, Utah, I'm going to talk about a little bit at least is like, you know what? There's a slice of hope. Slice of hope that this team could win a Big 12 game this year because we're currently 0-4. The only team in conference that's 0-4 as well. But our game wasn't that much fun to talk about, except for unless you're a BYU fan. It was great to talk about. They had a heroic comeback. They didn't do that many things that right, and then they came back in the second half with a bunch of adjustments, and really hats off to them. They persevered. But what about your UCF fandom here in the Iowa State Cyclones?
Well, I don't know if you remember. You asked me a question on the podcast on which team that I thought we were more likely to beat, which undefeated team, and I told you I thought it was ISU. Iowa State, we just matched up really well. After talking, I actually did another podcast with Trevor from Saturday's Warrior, which is the College Huddle Big 12 representative for BYU. And he's worried about us because you guys ran all over him last week. But, it was a great game. UCF got out of their offensive funk. We started a new quarterback there, Ja'Cory Brown. From an offensive perspective, we put over 400 yards or pretty close to 400 yards in rushing. He put 154 yards on, I think it was 13 carries on his own. Plus RJ Harvey had close to 300 yards on his own as well. So offensively, it looks like there were some things to take away that were positive. Defensively, it looked really, really good. So that progression of gelling together since Florida game, Florida, Cincinnati, and now Iowa State looks pretty good. So it was an exciting game. It sucked towards the end. I'm going to get my own violin out there. If anybody watched the game or got the ESPN alert, I think that's more that's more than a violin there. That was
I was going big time violin here. There's no small violin here. We're talking about how our teams both sorely lost in games. We're going to live it up a little bit.
Well, I mean, honestly, let's be honest. We were talking about this, and I think all of college football was the PI pass that was 15 yards over that guy's head. And then in the waning seconds of the game after that PI, it put them on the 2-yard line. And they false started big time, which should have triggered a 10-second runoff to end the game, but it didn't. And so, we had our chances to win this game. All we had to do was get a first down, and we couldn't muster it on the last drive. And we went hurry up on the last drive when we probably shouldn't have. But listen, there's it's hopium. Now the question is, we're playing BYU this week. Does that turn into copium? I'm hoping that it stays on the hopium side.
Hey, there's some wordplay there for sure. But I will tell you, we are not the only conference talking about catchable balls. And I got to say, it's just so tough for me to think that, you know what, that ball was anywhere near the field. And I think Georgia fans would also agree from their game. So, with that being said, we'll talk about some rising stars in the Big 12 per se, as far as, Iowa State and BYU, I will say I have a memory of going to the Jack Campbell Stadium in Iowa back in 2017, where Oklahoma State won, and it's 2016. I can't here. Everything runs together. But Oklahoma State won. It was 10-0 after that game, and an Iowa State fan broke my dad's ribs by shoving him into a guardrail. So that was a fun deal.
And by the
Yeah,
way, did you say Jack Campbell? It's Jack Trice Stadium.
is it Jack Trice now? Oh, my apologies. Yeah. I'm sure it's always been Jack Trice. Yeah, my apologies. Thank you for making
It's
that check over.
now. No.
Yeah,
It is now. It was just
yeah,
renamed.
yeah, today. No, but yeah, that's my memories of Iowa State here. I I will say I don't it doesn't matter, but I am kinda a little I'm not kind of or a little. I am confused why BYU is not ranked ahead of Iowa State. This is not because after the Oklahoma State loss, I'm like, well, I think BYU looks better. It's not because of that, honestly. It's because BYU has the best win. They have the best win, and it's by absolutely just killing K-State. Granted, in their own, in Provo, Utah, the home game, etc. But 38-9. Well, now we're seeing Avery Johnson just play incredibly well for this K-State team, who's not far behind them, ranked 16th in the country. And they've got a
K
fun
K
matchup at least, this
K
weekend
State
for them. Yeah.
K-State's becoming the team that we thought they could be, and the key to that was always going to be Avery Johnson's development. And when he turned into the Avery Johnson we all expected him to become, and we've been saying that all season long, is as Avery Johnson gets more plays. I mean, we saw him. He came in last year in our game towards the end of the game in the last, I think it was like quarter and a half or something like that, and he looked stellar at that point. And he was highly touted. He's highly touted for a reason. He can beat you with his feet. He's got a pretty good arm, and he makes some pretty smart decisions. And so now he's not turning the ball over. He's getting into his groove. This K-State team looks like the K-State team that everybody had ranked highly early in the season. So hats off to K-State fans right now.
Yeah, there were definitely 3 preseason favorites, and only one still remains as anywhere near a favorite to be at least in the conference championship game. Oklahoma State and Utah have just fallen off the radar completely. I do want to ask you a little bit about that, Kira, but do also want to add in K-State. Yeah, they're just scoring at will now. I mean, they just thumped West Virginia at their place, 45-18. And before then, I think Colorado just kind of showed they can play up to their competition a little bit, but in Boulder, K-State wins, but by 3, squeak it out, but a win's a win. And going back to it here, I just do want to ask you, why do you think Utah and Oklahoma State's like preseason expectations were so high, and why have they fallen so far? I know the easy explanation here, at least in my book, is hey, injuries. Oklahoma State's down 4 starters on defense. We're down a starter on offensive line. But all of that's just been progressively going throughout the season. Oh, yeah, I'm not trying to say that's the only. I mean, we lose a guy, we lose a guy in the non-con, and then we've lost another one in conference play and another one in conference, etc. So, like, not like we were left without all 4 starters here after the first game of the season either. So there's definitely a lot to say. And then Utah, Cam Rising, their guy, who I think in this year, Utah, if he had him fully healthy, they'd be playing pretty darn well and maybe still be
Well,
unbeaten, honestly. I'm not
let
sure.
me start with Utah. So you asked the reason why they were so highly rated, right? So last year, Utah, without their star quarterback Cam Rising, still had a pretty respectable year, and one in which they were positioned. Traditionally, they had a sophomore slump, but then they've came into the Pac-12 and were competitive at a high level, to the point where 10-win seasons were kind of the minimum expectation. And so this Utah team that transitioned to the Big 12, the year before Cam went down, or the year that he went down, because he was out for an entire year, they were playing at a very high level. Then the following year he was out, and the defense and the offense, and a lot of those same players are on this year's team, still played well, 9-10 win season, and now they were getting Cam Rising back, right? And coming into the season, the question I asked everybody, including on this podcast, was which Cam Rising was going to show up. Is it going to be a hobbled or injured Cam Rising because he had a pretty severe injury and he's injury prone? or is this going to be the Cam Rising before the injury? And he got injured again. So we never really got to answer that question, right? And so I feel like for me, why they aren't living up to expectations, I felt that Utah would be more competitive than what they are, even without Cam Rising, because most of the team that was from those winning teams was still there. And they're pretty good. They're a really good defensive team. And anytime you have that plus fundamentals on the offensive football side, that should make for a pretty good season for you. So they're a little bit of a head scratcher as far as why they are where they are. It's not just because Cam Rising was out, because Cam Rising was last year, and this was essentially the same team. So expectations should be higher than where they are today. But I don't like to should myself. As far as OSU is concerned, Ollie Gordon hasn't performed at the level of last year at all, right? And OSU was in a lot of close games last year that they won. And when I watch OSU play this year, they can score points, but they can also make mistakes. Their defense isn't as good, and they can't overcome the mistakes that they make. If they had their offense, if you guys had your offense and you didn't have 2 turnovers a game, you'd be in a much better position to win, because it's an offensive sprint and basically you're handing the ball back to the opposing offense. And I think that's, in a nutshell, what's happening for Oklahoma State right now.
Yeah, I can only agree as an Oklahoma State fan that it just has not been a good season whatsoever, and it's not gone as expected. Heck, I wish we could deploy a whole new offense this weekend here just to really show everyone that we've got some more tricks up our sleeves, because I think that's the way that we basically played so well in the game and Provo this past weekend against BYU. They just did not see a running quarterback coming from Oklahoma State, especially with the way that, Rangel gets injured on the play, but he ran for 54 yards. You were not seeing that out of the Alan Bowman-led offense at all, or anything close to it. And honestly, I don't think we had seen it out of Rangel in college thus far. He had more yards in that one game than he had, I think, in his career, and he'd played multiple games beforehand. So it's a wild thing to see, but also he had played bits and parts of games too, not like a whole game, just complete start to finish. On the other hand here, though, we were not really talking about BYU or Iowa State. BYU last year finished the season 5-7. Iowa State, I believe, made it to a bowl game, but of course was not in like conference championship type of material or something close to it. And both are bringing back the exact same quarterbacks, I know, and the same head coaches, who both are well-known head coaches, and both quarterbacks. Honestly, BYU didn't even know if they'd have the BYU, as everyone's calling it, but they didn't know if they have Jake Retzlaff starting quarterback this year, or somebody else. So to me, what do you think brought out to, at least what are you seeing here from BYU and Iowa State, where you're like, yeah, you know what? Like, I think they are good, because last year they just were not.
Well, BYU again, and defense wins championships. And as a former defensive player, I believe that wholeheartedly, right? What you see out of both BYU and Iowa State is they are great at turning the ball over and getting possessions for their team. Iowa State likes to run. They like to get turnovers, and they like to run clock, right? That's how they win games. And they're very, very adept at getting turnovers and generating turnovers this year. BYU is the same way, except they've kind of had to be. Their starting running back has been out, and he's actually coming back this week, which, surprise, surprise, he comes back for UCF. But, BYU, again, their winning formula has been to use their tight end to break up the box so that their running backs can eat up yards and get turnovers. That's been their bread and butter all season long. And so if you can take possessions away from someone else and put yourself in position with shorter fields, then you give yourself a better opportunity to score more points and make the other team one-dimensional. And if you've got a good defense, that spells for a good time for you. So both teams have been really, really good at doing that this year. Kansas State's a little bit different, right? Kansas State has had, at times, like earlier on in the season, their defense wasn't as good. It was good enough, but wasn't as good. And again, they win their games by playing fundamental football. They had some uncharacteristic turnovers earlier on, which made them come from behind to win some of those games, or been in closer games than you would expect. But they're now rounding into form, and as we mentioned earlier, their quarterback is rounding into form into what we expected him to be. So I think Kansas State's going to be one of those teams that's going to continue to get better throughout the season. BYU, it feels to me like, will trip up at some point. I don't know against who. And we've had a shakeup at the top. Next, you've got Cincinnati and Colorado. Texas Tech last week was who I thought they were, and I predicted that Baylor would beat them. And they are who we thought they were. Arizona State's still a wild card, but they lost their quarterback, so it'll be really interesting. So that's the grouping. That's the grouping really to kind of keep an eye out for, because everybody else has got significant losses in conference.
Yeah, and honestly, they're it's really adding up at this point. I'm hopeful we see just K-State, Iowa State, and BYU went out. Just I mean, it would be fun to see the Farmageddon where K-State plays Iowa State mean, a lot here, and not one of the two teams fall off here beforehand. And it's not too many games away before they do play. But then BYU doesn't match up against either of those two schools, so they went out, they're in. I really am surprised by Tech and Cincinnati and Colorado, honestly, all being 3-1 in conference. But then when you look into it, Colorado has played some good opponents, really good, and some bad opponents, really bad. They definitely played down to Baylor's level when Baylor was not looking great, but they played up to K-State's level when K-State, I mean, being K-State basically, and Avery Johnson. So anything at all here that we want to take away from Colorado? I know we got to have David Talks Buffs here, the new College Huddle account for Colorado, on with us before too long. But any other mention here about Colorado and kind of how they've done this season, and
Yeah,
any mind-blowing expectations here that they've met?
yeah, I think Colorado's a team of athletes, and last year they lost some close games too. So they're a little Jekyll and Hyde, right? But you're going to get a strong offense. You're going to get Travis Hunter. And if you've got Travis Hunter, that's going to put you in a position to win games. You just can't. Where they're going to go, but teams have just not been able to stop them, right? And that's been the challenge the whole season. When UCF played them, without Travis Hunter, Colorado probably doesn't win that game on either side of the ball. So it's pretty interesting. I did see the big knock on Colorado and Deion Sanders specifically has been that, is he an actual, can he actually coach? And what I did see in our game when we played them, and I don't know enough of their tendencies and what they played in other games, but they completely changed their offense in the week leading up to UCF. So they saw this as a challenge. They ran the ball a lot more. We saw a lot different schemes, et cetera. And, UCF should expect that and be able to adjust. But I think, UCF was another team that people thought Utah and UCF at the end of the season for the Black Friday game could have been one with conference championship implications. Unfortunately, our quarterback situation wasn't what we thought it was. And now we've finally got another quarterback after starting two different quarterbacks in two different games after KJ Jefferson, who was a complete bust for us. They're starting to gather some rhythm too, but our current starting quarterback was taking reps with the threes 2 weeks ago, right? So it's going to take a little while to get that passing game aspect. But it's interesting. I mean, you never know what you're going to get in the Big 12. That's always been the fun part of playing in the Big 12. But there are some consistent teams like Kansas State. Cincinnati has been really surprising on how well their offense has been playing. Satterfield has done a pretty good job getting them going. So they're the other surprise team for this year. Colorado could have gone either way, but looks like for now, Deion's living up to the hype.
Yeah, we'll see if he stays there after the season. It's a question I think I have. I don't know if that's percolating on anyone else's mind here, but as seems like both of his sons and Travis Hunter leave for the NFL this offseason, there could be some moves being made by Deion Sanders, or not, or some opportunities passed on by the universities as well too that could make those moves. So, um, with that being said, here I'll try to stop saying that phrase every so often, but there are a lot of games here upcoming this weekend that we could talk about. The biggest matchup we've talked about so far here is, I mean, Big 12 wise, at least you got BYU playing because Iowa State's off, and then you got K State playing as well. The two ranked teams in the Big 12 playing this weekend. Are you more likely seeing that KU would beat K State or that UCF would beat BYU? Which would you rather? Which would you rather lay money on?
Well, right now, I would say UCF beating BYU after last week's performance, right? And that's not me saying that as a UCF fan. That's me saying it as seeing what I've seen on the field for the entire season. By the way, did you know that we can officially say last week that Baylor won and Texas Tech lost the butt game? It's BUTT, Baylor University, Texas Tech. It was the butt game. So, which is what I was expecting. But, if I'm looking at the best game for this week, I really think it's Colorado Cincinnati. I think they're pretty evenly matched. Cincinnati's strength is going to be their D line. But it'll be interesting to see what the difference is going to be defensively with Travis Hunter involved, and if he can overcome a pretty good Cincinnati offense, right? It's one of those things where Colorado is really 2 to 3 players that make up their success. Not hoping for this at all for anyone, but if someone gets injured, I think Colorado falls apart pretty quickly, and they've been lucky with that. Cincinnati is a little bit more consistent of a team. They're not great at anything in particular, but they're good in most things. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes, because if Colorado has an off game, Cincinnati could sneak up and beat them. But I think those are the two most evenly matched teams. K-State, Kansas is just not there. They were not the team from last year that we were expecting with Daniels back this year. Utah, Houston, I think Utah still beats Houston. But as far as the best game of the week, I think it's Cincinnati, Colorado.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree a lot here. I think a night game in Boulder is always fun to watch on TV, at least when the students are into it, not throwing stuff on the field. But yeah, the other games that really we could talk more about it all is like, I mean, preseason wise, I thought Arizona would be a little bit better than they have been. Um, but that's sort of the only other game here where I'm like, you know what, we could talk about, but I mean, West Virginia,
Texas Tech,
Arizona is like,
Texas, Texas Tech, TCU may be a more interesting game than you think, because they both have good offenses and not so great defenses. So that might be one of your traditional high scoring, interstate type of games that might be fun to watch too. So to me, it would be Cincy, CU. I think Texas Tech, TCU, Arizona, West Virginia could be interesting, but I think West Virginia runs away with that one. And if UCF plays like we did last week and the defense continues to play like they have the past 3 weeks, BYU UCF could be a whole lot of fun. But I'll be watching that one live from the stands.
there we go. Well, that one, your guys' game has the smallest point spread here this weekend, at least as we're recording this one here on Wednesday night. If UCF's favored by 2. So, and this is from the ESPN bet. It's from getting the odds here. Oklahoma State, Baylor's favored by 7. TCU's favored by 6.5 versus Texas Tech in Fort Worth, though. Arizona's favored by 3.5. Utah's favored by 3.5 at Houston. And then K-State's favored by 10 and Colorado's favored by 5.5. Any of those also jump out to you here as being a little bit off comparatively to where you thought it'd be?
Utah, Houston.
Yeah.
That
Only
one.
being Utah by 3.5?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tickets are good. Tickets are right now as low as $2 for that game, too. So it is the cheapest one to go to. It is a Houston home game, though. So fingers crossed, Houston fans kind of figure it out here and get out to the games a little more to support their program, and maybe that'll bring some more money in the door for NIL funds. Hopefully, that's the hot thought I
They
have
don't
right now as
they
Houston fans.
they don't have a problem with that. They don't
Well,
they don't have a problem with NIL funds. The problem they have is getting butts and seats. And I'm talking about Houston.
yeah, but like, what one would think if they didn't have a problem with NIL funds, then their play on the field would be better than it has been. That's all I would say, and that would bring fans in easily. I mean, one would guesstimate here as a fan of a team that's not one of the best NIL teams every single week in, week out. As far as Oklahoma State goes, we're not killing it in NIL funds. We hopefully will hear before too long. It's kind of the concert series we're having in Stillwater here and next year. But with that being said, gosh, I keep saying that.
Here's the here's
It's just wild.
here's the thing about Houston. They've got some talent on that team. Obviously, it's in Texas, and they do have an NIL fund. The problem that Houston has was Holgerson, Holgede, Houston, and then who they brought to bring in as a program builder. He's not the hot coach looking up to move up. Willie Fritz did the same thing with Tulane. He had success before Tulane, but it took him a while to put the foundational pieces of his offense and defense in place to get them where they are consistently successful. So Willie Fritz, in my opinion, he took on a rebuild. So I don't think it's so much the talent. I think it's the time that's needed to get the right pieces in place and to install what Willie Fritz likes to do. And he took a little while at Tulane to do it, and I expect him to take a little while at Houston. But I think long term, Houston's going to be better for it.
I agree. I agree. I want it to be a very competitive league, not a league that's beating itself so much. But then again, when that happens, you hear about the Big 12 being so just mediocre because every team can beat each other. No one's really superior than the other guys. And then what happens in the SEC? It's this league is so tough. It's so deep. It's got so many different teams can beat so many others. So I'm hoping that Houston wins more because when they win more, at least non-conference wise, and they beat UNLV, for example, then all of a sudden, hey, you know what? We look a lot better as a conference. Maybe 1 year or 2 years doesn't make a huge difference, but I'm hoping going forward here, that's kind of the deal. I mean, hoping Florida State and Clemson join, but that's a
Yeah.
lot of fingers crossed here on those.
Yeah, I will say this on Florida State and Clemson. There's been some reporting recently on that whole situation. ESPN does have an option for a part of their contract, right? So, but they don't have an option on the other part of their contract. So that contract's going to run through 2036 unless there's some sort of mutual agreement like we did with Texas, where it benefits everybody and OU, or if that doesn't happen, there's some sort of legal intervention, and I don't see that happening based on where the case is and what the contracts involved are, and I don't see the ACC letting either FSU or Clemson out. And FSU, after making so much noise, laid a turd this year anyway. So, that train kind of slowly pulled back into the station. They reversed and pulled back into the station because they were the ones that were the vocal ones. Clemson played it smart, let FSU do all the talking, and they haven't backed it up on the field, so that kind of hurt their case on either unequal revenue sharing or being able to get out of the league.
Yeah, no, FSU's in a tough spot here. There may be some hot takes that we really just give out here on the last episode of the Big 12 Huddle football wise here at some point later on this year before the offseason hits and really start trying to tease that out. The other news, though, that I have here from Kansas City is that Big 12 Media Days are this week here for basketball. And just want to talk through the Big 12 preseason poll a little bit with you. I don't know if you've reviewed it too much here, but Big 12 basketball does tip off next month in November here. So just a week and change away. Oklahoma State here, not projected to finish last in the Big 12, which I do think is a little bit of a shocker. But then again, there's always Utah and Colorado. So it's nice to see there's two other teams here that
So
we should
let's
just automatically be walking in and beating, because that's one of the advantages here. When the Big 12 expands a little bit, then the ceiling is a little bit higher, but the floor is also a little bit lower.
well let's run through the rankings for the teams real quick.
Yeah. So we've got KU. I mean, their season projected to win the whole thing, and preseason wise, they're number one in the country in any poll. Then you've got Houston here, followed by Iowa State, Baylor, Arizona, Cincinnati. Those are the top 6 teams. Followed by Texas Tech, K-State, BYU, TCU. So that's the top 10. And then UCF, Arizona State, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Colorado, and Utah to finish out the 16.
West Virginia. That's
Yeah,
interesting that they're
real
that
real
low.
low. I will say we've got the votes as well here too. And West Virginia has 62 votes. Arizona State has 64 votes. So they're splitting hairs here between those two. But then UCF, you guys are voted up there 83. You're in there's a gap. So yeah.
UCF's an interesting team this year. I think UCF's going to be a lot of drama. And what I mean by that is we loaded up on talent. Some people are joking about Last Chance U, right? For some of the people that we brought on board. But it's a very talented roster. The question for Johnny Dawkins is going to be, can he get that roster to mesh? Early returns, it seems like everybody from a personalities perspective is playing by the rules. And we had our first exhibition game this past weekend against Florida Gulf Coast University, which people may know from in recent years had a run and are known for their 3-ball. And so we played them and we beat them pretty handily after 3 quarters. So you're starting to see us mess with rotation, see who we're going to have. We have a 5-star starting center who was the number 1 center in the country, who reclassified this year to play for us in team. And he looks the part. That guy looks like he's going to be, I mean, centers aren't worth what they used to be, but he's got the offensive game. He's got the defensive game. And we've got some big names in years past. You've heard Mikey Williams. You've heard of Benny. You've heard of Dior. You've heard of, it's kind of like a who's who of the top 5 picks in or recruit rankings in the past like 2 years or 3 years. So from a talent perspective, these guys have all been other places. So Benny Williams did great at Syracuse, but he got into some trouble. Dior, same way. Mikey Williams, same way, etc. But these are all guys that have the talent and have gone through whatever they're supposed to go through and are eligible, and we're putting them all together. So it'll be really interesting. I see for us, Johnny Dawkins' vision is being realized a little bit you're going to see more smaller ball out of us, and you're going to see like a Houston-esque kind of really press heavy like we played last year. And a Bob Huggins type team where you're doing a lot of full court press, and we've got a lot of depth with a lot of talent. So you're going to see a lot of substitutions being made. And we've got what we upgraded on was our shooting, because one thing we were missing last year was the 3-point shooter. So this team can be dangerous. It'll be really interesting to see what it looks like at the end of the year.
Yeah, and you know what? Looking through the rest of the Big 12 here, no matter what, you guys need a center. And of course, Big 12 player to watch here of the year. I don't think it's shocked by anyone for me to say Hunter Dickinson is the guy here. He's unanimous all Big 12 first team.
Hasn't he been the last 3 years?
Oh yeah, I mean 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly.
I cannot get over the fact that some of these guys are still playing college ball. I couldn't get over the fact that Alan Bowman was still playing college football, by the way, too, just for everyone, just all transparency. I could not believe that he was coming back for a 7th year. But then again, it was always rumored he would have a chance to come back for this year for Oklahoma State and maybe to our own detriment here. But still stay on the basketball topic here. Besides West Virginia being ranked 13th here and just a little bit above Oklahoma State, any other teams here that really shock you? I mean, we've got 5 teams that are ranked preseason wise from the Big 12 that are just tops in the country here. And after that, I mean, there's just household name programs that I think everyone in the nation would go, yeah, I've picked them in my Final Four before in the last 5 years. Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
after the top 5 teams of KU, Houston, Iowa State, Baylor, and Arizona, we're talking about other just basketball kind of powerhouses where we talked about Mick Cronin not too long ago here. I forget if that was before we started recording or after, kind of with him coaching at Cincinnati, but Cincinnati 6. I know he's not there anymore, but then Texas Tech, K-State, Jerome Tang there up in Manhattan. And then, BYU, who is rumored right now to get the top recruit in the nation, not for this season, but for next season as well. And there's a whole ongoing deal. Love to have Trevor from Saturday's Warrior BYU. Already shot him out once in the podcast. Why not make it twice here just to sweeten it up a little bit? So hopefully UCF wins this weekend, anyways, for you guys. And just drinks everyone all over the place. But I mean, the Utah Jazz might be helping pay BYU to get the recruit there. So it's a wild story overall.
Yeah, they've
Very
had a
possible.
focus on it, but even going beyond the Big 12, the preseason coaches poll came out, right?
Mhm.
Um, Kansas number 1, Houston number 4, Iowa State number 6, Baylor number 8, Arizona number 9, Cincinnati number 20. I mean, if you're talking about a basketball centric league, we all know that this is the best basketball league in the country. And I don't think that's changing. I mean, we're talking about relative to the Big 12 where these teams are ranked. But then when you look at them relative to everybody else and where people are ranking them, I mean, BYU is 4, 5 outside of the top 25. Kansas State is 7 out of the top 25. Um, that's this conference is nothing to sneeze at when it comes to basketball, and I absolutely love it. As far as being surprised, I think West Virginia is the big one, but we all know that Huggy Bear is no longer at West Virginia, and he was West Virginia basketball for a really long time. You knew that what you were going to get in West Virginia at that time. But other than that, I mean, the Pac-12 schools were not known for basketball. Utah was not known for basketball, so that doesn't surprise me.
I mean,
Yeah,
Baylor got in 2 top transfers, one from Duke, one from Miami, and made huge improvements to their roster as well. No one takes a day off in the Big 12 in basketball, that's for sure.
no. And, Arizona State was up and down as far as being competitive in the Pac-12. So that really doesn't surprise me either. So looking at this, I mean, I would say that Texas Tech being as high as they are, I think might be a little bit of a surprise for me. I don't know what to make out of Cincinnati this year. So that might be a little bit of a surprise for me. But outside of that, I'm not really surprised at any of those rankings.
Yeah, and the 2 biggest quotes here from Media Day, just looking through everything, I think are both from KU's head coach Bill Self. And quote, "I can tell you hands down, this is going to be the hardest year to win our league," Self said. And then the other quote here, just to name, is quote, "You better be equipped to be disappointed because nobody's going to run the table," end quote. And I
Mhm.
think those 2 things encapsulate basically the Big 12 conference here as a whole. Previously, when the Big 12 did have OU and Texas was never easy to beat. OU always had teams just, I mean, I don't want to say all over the place or anything like that, but just consistently good teams. But then when it was also Nebraska, I mean, Nebraska displayed some good college basketball at some point in their history. I'm got to be sure of it, but it has not been recently. It was not recently since really I started watching, heavily college basketball and following it about 20 years ago here. So since '04, I don't remember Nebraska making a stand. And I know they left the Big 12 shortly after that, not too many years later, but still, yeah, replacing them with Utah instead. I don't think the conference is at any point falling off by having a Utah and Colorado, because those are 2 out of the 16 teams that we're not really talking about as far as Big 12 potential or Big 12 storied programs in basketball. But then again, Colorado last year is a top 10 draft pick. And Utah has had a number 1 overall draft pick, believe it or not, in Andrew Bogut here. So both of those programs, just their history of playing basketball, is a good history collectively. And then the rest of the teams that we talk about, I mean, you go Oklahoma State, all right, well, you've got Eddie Sutton, I go on for days, of course. Then you've got West Virginia with, Huggy, as you just mentioned. And just keep going with their history. So really, the Big 12 is a gauntlet every single night. There's no nights off here, and I'm excited to watch Big 12 basketball. I'm also very interested because Oklahoma State has a brand new head coach here in Steve Lutz, the first time new head coach in 7 years. Previously having Mike Boynton, and almost our entire roster is turned over, returning back 3 guys from last year. Not all of them are even starters. So I'm really excited to see how Oklahoma State plays this year. I'm also excited to see how UCF plays this year as well too, and really just learn more about the rest of the Big 12, because it's going to
Yeah,
be a battle every night.
the storyline for me is I want to see how the Pac schools do in the Big 12, right? Cincinnati, when they came over from the ACC, they were always pretty good in basketball, though we had their number and were competing for championships the last 4 or 5 years, right? Um, Arizona had a good team last year. They never quite could get over the hump since forever, in a long time, but they always have a competitive team. So it'll be interesting to see them there. Colorado and Utah, I really wasn't expecting much out of. BYU is going to be interesting because their center that was so successful, their shooting center that would stay at the top of the key and throw up threes. I think he's gone. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Preseason polls are preseason polls, and you won't know until you play the games. But I'm not surprised that anybody placed them where they are today. And I think UConn is going to have UConn's going to have another continue to do really, really well, as is Duke. But in the grand scheme of things, we have a strong case for another national championship team.
We sure do here. And you talk about preseason rankings. We've seen how it's been really, really different for football playing out here this season. So we know basketball, there's probably some stock to put in it, just because the top teams are going to be just kind of around the top, one would think. But then again, they don't tell you much. And the rest of the teams here as well too. It's just really interesting to see Alabama just really, really high up there. But then Coach Cal over Arkansas here, also just seemingly just making Arkansas just jump off the page. Of course, I know they've got a whole new deal with it, NIL money and other incentives here going on as well too. So it'll be a lot of fun to watch college basketball this year. I'm probably more excited for it to tip off than I have been in quite some time, just to get my mind off of the Oklahoma State football season thus far. Lastly, here, just want to cover for a couple of moments here, football wise. Just kind of want to get your take here. We've talked at nauseum about K State, Iowa State, BYU. If it's not those 3 teams, who else do you think is the best chance making the Big 12 Conference Championship this year?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And I can answer it first here. And I got to say, I know I might get killed for it, but I'm going to say Colorado. I think they have played really up to their opponents and really down to their opponents as well too. But when you look at the rest of the season here for Colorado, after this weekend they have a bye week, and then they play at Texas Tech, and then they go on here to host Utah, who's not proven to be good as we know this season. And they've kind of finished out the season here, playing at KU and then hosting Oklahoma State. So I think Colorado's schedule really lends themselves to only have the one loss to K State in the Big 12, and down the stretch here could give them that advantage. They may be the name everyone's thinking too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Colorado's got a good chance. I haven't looked at the rest of Cincinnati's schedule, but they have an offense that can compete. I still don't believe in Texas Tech, and this is not me beating on Texas Tech, folks. It's not that I hate tortillas flying through the air at all. By the way, you're supposed to poke a hole in the center so they fly farther. I've learned that. But I think that I don't believe Texas Tech has a really good offense. They don't have any semblance of a defense, and that's going to make it really tough for them to win in the Big 12 this year because there's several good defenses in the Big 12.
Yeah, and this weekend's matchup here of Cincinnati at Colorado, I think, could decide that really. The other part of it is that Cincinnati does have to play K-State at K-State later on this season too, November 23rd that weekend. So I think Cincinnati has that one tough matchup, and Colorado just may not have any tough matchups after this weekend in Cincinnati, really. We'll see how the Oklahoma State team is, but I think we could play spoiler to Colorado, and also we could just absolutely just be flat to end out the season against them. And then the other teams Colorado is playing against here, it's kind of laughable at the end of the day. Once I went through the whole schedule, like you just covered with Texas Tech, I mean, Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter going to Lubbock, they might put up 60 themselves, just like Baylor did last weekend on Tech. And then after that, it's just kind of all right, is Utah going to be able to do anything on offense? And, we just keep going down the line here basically as well too with at KU. I mean, it's not even a home game for KU. Their whole stadium's being under construction. So it's at Kansas City, and we might see more Colorado fans be packing out the stadium here just because we know the Dion effect has proven to be true here after they sold out their gold and black scrimmage here 2 years ago when Dion joined, and then people were selling tickets to it online and making money off of it. I really had to rethink my whole Colorado perspective here on how their fandom is. But the last thing I'd say here is that of those top three, who do you feel the best about between Iowa State, K State, and BYU? Who do you think you're willing to make a surefire? Like, hey, I'd be willing to put down some money here that one of these three is going to make it, and this is the one I feel the best about.
All right, the one I feel. Let me start with this. The one I feel the least best about is BYU.
Okay. Tell me why. Answer me here.
I think Iowa State has a good enough defense that can force turnovers, and their quarterback is slippery enough that he can win them some games. K-State is coming on at the right time. Their defense isn't anything crazy, but it's good, and they've got an exceptional quarterback. So as long as he continues his progression, they can run the ball, he can run the ball, and he can throw the ball. As Avery kind of develops throughout the season, I think he's going to get better and better, and thereby I think they're going to get better and better. So for me, if I was putting money on it, I would say Iowa State, Kansas State in the championship game.
Yeah, I gotta say I agree. I do not feel the greatest about BYU. Something about last season ending the year 5-7 and returning back so many of the same players to me means that there is a drop off. There is a fall off at some point here that you're going to have reality kind of hit you in the face. And the way Oklahoma State played at your place last weekend by just really just changing up the offensive scheme to me is indicative that one of these last couple of games here down the schedule will trip them up. Although they play at Utah and then they host KU for the last two games of the season. I mean, am I reading that right? Yeah, they don't play any other games after those. So they've got their bye week. They got their bye week following. So BYU is really had a schedule here. And far as excuse me, I have the wrong calendar date selected. My apologies to everyone listening here. I will figure this out one of these days. But yeah, I mean they just don't play that many teams here that are tough down stretch of the season. They also play at Arizona State and then host Houston. So BYU, I'm kind of like, hey, you know what? I think they could. I mean, I think they could for sure. Iowa State, maybe though. Maybe then. Maybe I think hosting K-State, yeah, maybe I give you the slight advantage. But then again, I really do agree with Avery Johnson playing really well. And, Iowa State's going to be tested a little bit here with Cincinnati coming up here on November 16th.
Yeah, BYU's playing after they play our game, they're playing Houston to finish out this season. They're playing Arizona State, which could be a tough matchup. But again, they lost their quarterback, so it'll be interesting to see how they recover. Did not look good in their last game. They play Kansas. You're right. I mean, and then Utah, which we thought would be a tough game, but now looks like it's not going to be. So it looks like the football gods have set it up so that if BYU was going to do it, they could do it this year. And I remember at the beginning of the season, you guys were like, "Oh, Iowa State's not going to do anything," and I was like, "Look at Iowa State. Look out for Iowa State, especially towards the end of the year."
If there's one team that I really despise in the Big 12 that no one would guess, it's got to be Iowa State. And I think if anyone thinks about Oklahoma State fandom, they're like, oh, yeah, I bet they dislike those guys. Because 2011, the field goal is just that went in, but maybe didn't. And then 2021, the first down that was, but maybe wasn't. So, yeah, you can keep playing the violin here. But, yeah, there's definitely a hatred of Iowa State. So I'll pick K-State over them because K-State memories are not as tough or challenging. And they're definitely not as memorable. So, with that being said, we'll go ahead and wrap this one out here. Where can everyone find the United Ones podcast and more from the Night Bengal here, the College Huddles Big 12 show?
Yeah. So you can find us at the Nighted Ones on Twitter. You can also find me at Night Bengal on Twitter. You can find all of the shows, Fourth in Florida, Big 12 Huddle, and the Nighted Ones on YouTube, Spotify. Well, not Big 12 Huddle yet, but hopefully, I've been talking to Calvin about this. We've got some requests to put this show on the podcast networks as well, so we're looking at doing that. But you can find the Nighted Ones on YouTube, all your podcast platform channels, and on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and everywhere else.
Yeah, we are working on it, y'all. So we may have this episode.
I kind of put him on the spot there. I'm just saying.
I will say there's steps. There's steps you have to go through, and one of the steps requires a lot more internet access, or at least internet download speed that I currently have access to get at least set up here live on the podcast. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this one out with my catchphrase and say, please follow at the CGA Tour on Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you listen to podcasts, available on all streaming platforms, including YouTube, with a link down below in the description here for the for Night Bengal and the Nighted Ones podcast, and for the CGA Tours podcast here, Oklahoma State's College Huddle podcast. So, all things considered,
go Knights.
What do you got to say? And
go Knights. And charge on.
Go Pokes. Let's get the first win this weekend, Cowboys. Let's get the first Big 12 win, please.